Is rock a sometime thing? Is it here for a while to be gone forever?
Oh no,
It'll last?
There'll be derivatives, but it's today's music. I mean, you listen to television and you watch the movies. You look at Broadway and the theater. It's not rock and roll. It's today's music.
It's come right into the mainstream.
I don't think you should call it rock and roll. I mean, there is rock and roll just like there is R&B or soul or Latin, but it's today's music.
It's gone through some changes in the last 10 years, I suppose, hasn't it?
There's more of it, and there's a lot worse, and there's a lot better, but it's the best of it is much, much better because they have the advantage of having gained from the studios are improved, the equipment is improved, they've listened to the Beatles and Elton John, or they can take from that and add to it. Painters from other painters.
I think of rock musicians as being very young and almost as though they might outgrow rock performance. That's not so, I'm sure. We don't have any aged rock performers, do we?
You do, but you don't know it.
Really?
You have some, for one of the great English guitar players, one of the legends, is now 41 years old.
That's aged.
Well, in rock and roll it is.
Yes, it is.
You have the ones who came in at the beginning of the psychedelic era, and if they were 20 then, which is 65, 66, they're now 28, 20, and 30, which to the rock and roll kid is aging.
Yeah. But there's no reason they can't go on, is there? Or do they drop out?
No, unless success kills them or the public doesn't want them.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Is the public fickle about rock groups?
Very much so. More fickle. Because the mass of your rock audience is still will always be the 16 to 24. And as a rock patron ages, he leaves the frenetic groups and he goes into more esoteric and more chamber sound.
Yeah.
So that your rock and roll stars will change. The great ones aren't really rock and roll stars. They're lyricists and writers and entertainers. But you find very few physical groups lasting in popularity more than 3 or 4 years at the best. It's a rarity when a supergroup remains a supergroup. How many Rolling Stones are there?
Yeah. And the reason they don't remain a supergroup and die out is
because they don't keep their fans, and the fickle fan wants a new girl.
Wants a new one. You once referred to it as a rotten business. You've probably said a lot of things that you,
yes.
in the heat of the moment. Is it a rotten business in any sense at all?
Oh yes, it's rotten. It's more than likely. I would imagine that the man in the garment district or the man in the meat business would say the same thing of the interplay. But we deal in the buying and selling of people and talent for an evening, and I'd say it has to be the dirtiest business, but at the same, and the greasiest, but the most rewarding and the most challenging from where I see it.
How would it be dirty and greasy? You're dealing with pretty bright youngsters, for one thing, aren't you?
No, there are many of them that aren't bright. There's some that are bright. There are some of them who, street bright, yes. Formal education, most of them leave that for the music. But the rottenness is we're in a business where you roll the dice. You can lose $10,000, you can make $10,000 or $100. No, and when you have a lot of money involved, you will get all sorts of people. You will also get the huckster, the shuckster, the con man, and the good people. So it's dirty and greasy because the people who are in it, your competitors, have shades of colors. It's not all purity and honesty. If there's a young man who has a great deal of talent, and a manager comes to him and says, "I will do work for you, and I will be fair with you," and there's the other guy who says, "Listen, kid, I'll take care of you. I got these broads. I got this." Hey, so and you have to compete with that, and at the same time have the ability. And I don't think there's any business that could be close to this in the grease that exists.
I suppose if these supergroups have only a short life of 3 or 4 years, that competition's intensified, isn't it? To get it while it's there.
Especially now. You see, now the business end of it is much greater because the mass audience for rock and roll has increased tremendously. Look at record sales. A major group today sells 4 or 5 million records. So that when somebody wants to manage a rock and roll star today, or if somebody wants the publishing rights for rock, it's not $1 million. It's millions of dollars. So the intensity relative to the money that can be made is that much greater.
What happens to these young kids who make this kind of money that fast?
Problem.
Success is instant, almost instant.
Big problem. Big. Some handle it well, most don't. The majority end up not too happy. That I know. You can't make specific comments. The majority of the artists that I could name on less than 5 fingers the individuals who've become tremendously successful, who have changed positively.
Yeah. You've played a large part in the success of many of them. Does it give you a kind of paternal feeling toward them that say,
paternal?
watch your money, kid, and save
No,
it?
no.
You're not really mixed up in their lives
Away,
in that sense.
away from the business? No. Very few of them and I we're friendly, we see each other, yes,
Yeah.
but we don't socialize that much together. A few, because I live in
But you feel no responsibility for them, even though you've helped them gain this money. And
more brotherly than fatherly.
I see.
They don't like fatherly advice to begin with. The ones in the Bay Area and some of the English musicians, there's a strong relationship when we see each other, but there isn't this constant contact. And it's also very hard. Only in the last 2 or 3 years have I felt that musicians are listening to non-musicians. At the beginning, it was a very cliquish thing, that they wouldn't. I'm relatively a straight person.
Yeah.
It was only, I think I've only gained admittance into their inner circles in the last 2 or 3 years, after I closed the places, for some reason or other. I don't know why. But I was always, that's Bill, you know, fine, but he's a businessman and doesn't dress the way we dress and doesn't wear the clothing, doesn't do the social things we do. And
did they think
I think I've changed some also, so I've bent a little to them, but they've come out and seen
How have you changed, Bill?
There are some moral standards that I've lived around that I've come to accept more than I did some years ago, relating to the lifestyle of the younger people and the use of drugs. That doesn't mean that I condone everything that's done, but I'm much more liberal now in what I see and what I accept than I was some years ago. And I think that they're aware of that also.
People associate drugs with rock music. Has
Very
that been
much
your
so.
experience?
Yes.
What is that association? Does the musician feel he needs drugs? Does the use of drugs heighten the effect of the music for the listener?
Well, it's been said. I would think so. I'm not a musician. I don't know. I do know that smoking marijuana can make you feel pleasant. If it relates to, if you're saying, does it ease someone to get in front of 100,000 people feeling better? And what, if they feel better, is it valid? And I'd say yes. But what does it do to you? In the end, what does it do to your body? And that's where I've become a little more liberal. But what is it like to have 500,000 people at an outdoor festival tell you you're a queen, or that anything you do is okay with us, baby?
Yeah.
What happens to that person? I don't know. And if they take a shot of whiskey, or they take a hit or drag on a joint, I don't think that hurts them. The illusions can hurt them. Success can hurt them. The inability to cope with that. I think acid can hurt you.
Losing touch with reality.
Yes. It's the abuse of drugs that's the killer.
What about your concern as a proprietor when you ran Fillmore East and Fillmore West? Wasn't this a real problem with you?
Very much so. It remains a problem. I mean, let's be honest. That any official, government, state, city official, can close any public facility. You give me 10 minutes in any restaurant, in any hotel, and I mean, legally, we can close them all. So all you can do is make sure that they don't deal, there's no use of heavy drugs. Years ago, 66, 67, when I first started, I really thought it was nitroglycerin. It's going to blow up your body. And I'm not saying that it's good for you. I'm not saying that it's great. It's like chopped liver. No. What I am saying, I don't think it can kill you. And what you have to do is be careful of what you do with your body and how much you take of what it is that you take.
This is quite apart from the illegal aspects of it, of course.
Yeah. I would rather have if somebody can come to a concert, sit in the balcony and just enjoy it, fine, no problem. I would rather have a person smoking marijuana than sitting up there with a glass flask, some 18-year-old kid, and at the end of it just throws that bottle, as has happened at concerts, and just cracks somebody's skull.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that when you drive home stoned on grass, you're not going to crash your car. I hope you don't.
Yeah.
But you're less apt to hurt yourself than you are with liquor. Liquor is legal.
Bill, you've made your reputation based upon the quality of what you've done, the quality of the rock groups and so forth. How do you measure quality in rock groups for someone who's over the hill? I mean, to teach someone who's over the hill.
What is quality?
But you recognize it. You know it.
There are many groups that I think are good that I'll present maybe once, knowing that they're not going to make it. Because what you have to keep in mind, what you have to be aware of, is the public. They dictate what will succeed and not succeed. All you can do is put it on a plate for them to see.
You said the name of the game is the draw.
The name of the game is draw, right? And so what you can do is have a super group. When you have 2 or 3 groups on the show, you know you're going to sell out with Jefferson Starship or Santana or the Dead or Bob Dylan. So you can put a fine act in front of this captive audience, but they will decide whether they'll eat it or spit it out. So as a producer, I say, this is fine, this is so good. And if it succeeds, if you see something in a club in Chicago and I say, I want to put that act on with so-and-so in New York, when you put them on and the public enjoys it, there's an inner glow that, as a non-artist, you can't explain how that feels. Because what you're really doing is you're saying to yourself, and it's a great ego thing, oh, I was right. I was right for me, and I was also right for them.
Yeah.
But that's one of the pains of being a producer. That many times, one of my 2 or 3 favorite rock groups of all time was called H.P. Lovecraft. It never made it. There was another one called the Paul Winter Consort, who never made it. But then there are groups like Traffic and The Band who do make it. But
made it because the audience wanted them.
Made it not because I loved them. I only gave them a shot at a particular place.
Bill, the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West is a long distance from Berlin. I was quite surprised to discover you were born in Berlin.
Yes.
And from Russian immigrant parents who came to Berlin.
Right.
And born at a time in 1931, I guess this was the era of the musical here, Cabaret. It's odd to associate with a musical, but many people won't recognize the story from which Cabaret was done. Those awful years in the beginning of the Nazis in Germany. What do you recall of those years? Anything? Were you much too young?
No, I've never known what to do about that. From the day that I came here, I was 11, I have total amnesia of the first 9 years of my life. I remember nothing except that I left Germany in 1939 as an exchange student with, there's a children's orphanage right outside of Paris in Chaumont.
You were put in an orphanage because your father died when you were only 2 days old, didn't he?
And so from 1939 to 1941, I spent the war year, the French-German War, right outside of Paris. But prior to that, there's no memory of my sisters, who 2 of them are here now and 2 are in Europe, have told me about the childhood, but there was no direct memory of any kind until I was 9 years old.
What happened to you in Paris in the orphanage when the Nazis came into France?
Everybody has war stories, and I'll make this one short.
Okay.
As they came, they just, because all the children were Jewish, and the Red Cross sent 1 person, and we just, it's just retreat in carts and in trains and whatever way you can. We made our way to Marseille, and in Marseille, they put us on a cattle car to, we went through the Pyrenees, to Barcelona, from Barcelona to Madrid, Madrid to Lisbon, and Lisbon we were put on a freighter to Casablanca, Casablanca to Dakar, and in September of '41 we went via Cuba to New York, and I was put into a foster home organization in Pleasanton, New York. And the first few months that I spent here in America, I was in this human pet shop building. What happens is on weekends people would come to this building and look at children to take into their homes. Yeah. And I was not a very nice young man.
Why weren't you?
I don't know why. I remember I was
11 years old at this time, I suppose.
Well,
speaking any English at all?
No English. Rather belligerent, rather negative thoughts about life, and from what I remember now. But I was an angry young person. And about a month after I arrived here, this Jewish couple came from the Bronx, and the reason they took me into their home was that they had a child of their own who was two years older than I was, but he was taking up French and German in school, and those were the languages I spoke, and I went to live in the Bronx at the age of 11, and I lived there until I went to the Army.
What happened to the accent?
Well, the accent, when I came to the States in September, in December, the war broke out, Axis allies, and they were very, very bad days because I spoke no English, and they put me in a class with kids with 8-year-olds, and I got my head kicked in pretty good the first few months because I had this sick accent. This is the way I spoke, when I spoke English, and my brother and I, my foster brother and I, really caught hell at school, and with his help, on a day-to-day basis, I would just sit down in front of a mirror, and we would just speak. And he's still my brother. I'm 43 now. He's 45, and he lives in New York. We just practiced, and the only thing that I have left, sometimes I slur the z, th, and the r's. But within 6 months, I'd say, it was gone.
You didn't want to be different. You wanted to be accepted?
No, I just didn't want my head kicked in. I didn't care about the accent so much. Later on, when I was 17 and I took out my citizenship intention papers, I changed my name. I was on the school team, and I wanted to be
what was your
an
name?
American. Grajonka, Wolfgang Grajonka, which is a much nicer name than Bill Graham, but
Kind of sorry you changed it?
very much so. I've thought about changing it back simply because I have a boy now, and I want my boy to have my family name because I'm the only one in this country with that name.
What happened to your mother?
My mother went in the camps in 43 with one of my sisters, and I have 4 living sisters. One in L.A., one here, one in Vienna, and one in Geneva.
You got out of the Army after, well, you were in Korea, court-martialed a couple of times and won the Bronze Star. That seems to be a little inconsistent.
Just an angry but good soldier, I guess.
Yeah. Came back and went to school at Brooklyn College and got a degree, didn't you?
Yes.
Why business administration?
I don't know. There was nothing at the first job I ever wanted was a taxi cab driver, because I remember they were always able to listen to the ball games and the soap operas. And I wanted to go into business because that was a way of making money, because from the age of 15, 16, I had jobs after school and babysitting, and I spent all my school years in the mountains and the Catskills, summertime and weekends and Concord or Grossingers. And I know if you grow up having to make money, by the time I was 16, it cost me $48 a month to pay into the family. That was my my agreement, my contract. So there was always the entrepreneurial thoughts of how do I make money to do this. I wanted to have a car. I had a girlfriend named Joyce Fliegler, for whose affection I was competing with Julius, and I wanted to take her out. So I was always looking for ways of making money. And then the natural instinct was when I went to school, I took up a business course.
Business.
Yes.
That was the way to make money.
Yes.
You've made a lot of money with the Fillmore East
Yes.
and West and in rock, and yet you've said that money has not been your first motivation with respect to
No, it never
entrepreneurial
was.
rock.
I mean,
Never was.
it took a lot of failures. In other words, I got the jobs I went for before that. If it was office managing or a statistician.
You did a lot of odd jobs after you left school.
The one I failed at was acting. I wanted to become an actor at one time, and
Why?
I thought I had a lot of talent. I thought I wanted to be John Garfield was my idol, and
Yes.
I thought he was a great character actor. He wasn't handsome, but he was streets, and I thought he was believable, and I was very proud of his characters always, and I wanted to become another John Garfield.
Spent 7 years at it, didn't you?
Oh yes, lots of fencing, lots of body movement and diction, and that's how I got into this. That there was constant. Whenever I failed, I could go back and waiting on tables or managing a summer stock group. And I finally ended up back in San Francisco as an office manager in the early 60s with Alice Chalmers Manufacturing.
As an office manager?
As an office manager, yes. And, but I had this frustration about theater, and I met Ronnie Davis, who had the San Francisco Mime Troupe, and I left, it was a 26 grand a year job with Alice Chalmers, and I went to work for Ronnie.
Not at 26 grand?
At $120 a month. Yeah. I was the only full-time guy. And I spent a couple of years with that, and then we ran out of money, and I'd gotten to know a lot of the sub-bohemia of San Francisco, the Ginsbergs and the Sandy Bull, and the airplane, some of the musicians, and we staged a benefit, and then we staged another benefit. And
The benefit was a huge success.
huge. It was the greatest night of my life. Great, great show. November 6th, 1965.
How did you feel that, after going through what you would regard as some failures, to have that big success that night?
It just blew my mind. See, hip in New York and hip today is a much different thing. I knew the streets. I could tell shaved dice or cards and how to get the only seat on a subway. That kind of shiftiness. I could see if somebody's a good tipper or a bad tipper when I was a waiter. But that whole world that came into that building wasn't actors and wasn't theater. It was a whole life. I'd never met the Ginsbergs, you know, and Frank Zappa, yes, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti, but people who, you know, men hugging and kissing. I mean, I dreamed about, you know, the Russia and the dancing and the singing. Well, this night, everybody got bombed, and we had vodka, you know, 9 measures of vodka and a drop of orange juice. So everybody got pretty loaded, but people coming in with 8mm cameras with film around their neck and shooting it against the wall. And you know, I could sit here and say, oh, I've been hip to that all my life. No, this was all new. You know, jazz and poetry, rock and roll and free-form dancing. I had never seen it. And well, the greatest thing about that night is that the police came in around midnight and said, this is no good. We're getting complaints from the neighbors, and you've got to stop. And we had 1,000 people upstairs and thousands lying around the building on Howard Street. And I got into this long involved thing with this policeman, and he said, no, it's over and over, and he was a sergeant. And I remember till the day I die, and I kept on saying, you can't, Frank Sinatra's going to help us out, Rudy Valley's coming, Harry Belafonte. And he thought I was crazy, and I finally said, Captain? And he was a sergeant. The minute I called him Captain, everything was fine. He said, yes, son. And we came into this whole different relationship. He said, well, you clear some of these people out. So we told some people to leave. Then I ran downstairs and said, Ronnie, tell the people in the street we'll get them in. And once the cops left, and we got him in through the back, through the freight elevator. It was the greatest night of my life. 65.
After that, you decided to go into this, open up Fillmore West, and still later Fillmore East.
Yeah. This sounds like this is your life.
That does, doesn't it? They were huge successes. Why'd you close them down, Bill?
That's because I wasn't happy. And not to prove to anyone else, you make a lot of money, and the business has been very good to me. The public changed, perhaps I changed. And once you have all the goodies, the car, the house, then there's got to be the inner happiness. The Fillmores took up all of my life during the 65 to 71. I was married in 67. My work became my mistress. The marriage broke up simply because my love and adulation went to the work, and I found myself in 71 looking at the audience and looking at the stars and saying, this year I made 39 round trips to New York and back, and I had to weigh it, and a particular thing happened in New York with a particular artist that blew the fuse. Sometimes you make major decisions, not because some major thing happened. It's like a balloon. You'll take this and that, and then a little prick of the balloon, you break. Well, I broke. And they were closed simply because I wasn't happy anymore.
And inner happiness was and is very important to you.
The search for it is. I don't have it. I don't know how many people have it. If somebody says, are you happy? Relative to what? What is happiness? It's like, what is quality? I'm happier now, and I have no idea why. I've been very unhappy from the time the film was closed until maybe the last 6 months, because I closed them hoping that on natural evolution I would go into the next thing, which is directing a film maybe, or taking a trip around the world. But I haven't, and I've gone back to what I'm good at, which is what I'm doing. But in the last 6 months, I feel good. There are other plans that I have, things to do. The shows I've done lately, the major things that I've done, I'm very proud of, and I feel relatively happy.
What is the next thing, do you know? Where do you go?
I think for the next year or so, I'll be doing some major shows with some artists that I want to work with.
Rock artists.
Yes, rock artists. And hopefully, within a year or two, the things that I hoped I would do, just out of myself, I'll be able to do. I failed the last 3 or 4 years because I wanted to get up in the morning and say, I'm going to do a film today, or I'm going to produce a play. but they didn't happen. The inner thing didn't happen. I feel it coming on. I don't know where the salt and pepper comes from, but I feel it now. I feel a better balance inside of me. And, I don't know. I may sound silly. That's where I'm going to go.
Thank you very much.
Out of rock and roll. The great ones aren't really rock and roll stars. They're lyricists and writers and entertainers. But you find very few physical groups lasting in popularity more than 3 or 4 years at the best. It's a rarity when a supergroup remains a supergroup. How many Rolling Stones are there?
Yeah. And the reason they don't remain a supergroup and die out is
because they don't keep their fans. And the fickle fan wants a new girl.
Wants a new one. You once referred to it as a rotten business. You've probably said a lot of things that you,
yes.
in the heat of the moment. Is it a rotten business in any sense at all?
Oh yes, it's rotten. It's more than likely.
Is rock a sometime thing? Is it here for a while to be gone forever?
Oh no, it'll
last.
There'll be derivatives, but it's today's music. I mean, you listen to television and you watch the movies. You look at Broadway and the theater. It's not rock and roll. It's today's music.
It's come right into the mainstream.
I don't think you should call it rock and roll. I mean, there is rock and roll just like there is R&B or soul or Latin, but it's today's music.
It's gone through some changes in the last 10 years, I suppose, hasn't it?
There's more of it, and there's a lot worse, and there's a lot better, but it's the best of it is much, much better because they have the advantage of having gained from the psychedelic era, and if they were 20 then, which is 65, 66, they're now 28, 20, and 30, which to the rock and roll kid is aging.
Yeah. But there's no reason they can't go on, is there? Or do they drop out?
No, unless success kills them or the public doesn't want them.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Is the public fickle about rock groups?
Very much so. More fickle. Because the mass of your rock audience is still will always be the 16 to 24. And as a rock patron ages, he leaves the frenetic groups and he goes into more esoteric and more chamber sound.
Yeah.
So that your rock and roll stars will change. I would imagine that the man in the garment district or the man in the meat business would say the same thing of the interplay, but we deal in the buying and selling of people and talent for an evening. And I'd say it has to be the dirtiest business, but and the greasiest, but the most rewarding and the most challenging from where I see it.
How would it be dirty and greasy? You're dealing with pretty bright youngsters, for one thing, aren't you?
No, there are many of them that aren't bright. There's some that are bright. There are some of them who, street bright, yes. Formal education, most of them leave that for the music. But the rottenness is we're in a business where the studios are improved, the equipment is improved, they've listened to the Beatles and Elton John, or they can take from that and add to it. Painters from other painters.
I think of rock musicians as being very young and almost as though they might outgrow rock performance. That's not so, I'm sure. We don't have any aged rock performers, do we?
You do, but you don't know it.
Really?
You have some, for one of the great English guitar players, one of the legends, is now 41 years old. I'm 40.
That's aged.
Well, in rock and roll it is.
Yes, it is.
You have the ones who came in at the beginning of the